Jennifer.
Hello.
Mayor, we're now live on YouTube.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell.
You're very welcome.
Welcome, everyone, members of council, city staff, and those of you who have joined us for the live stream. Before we get started, I want to let you know that you can find a copy of tonight's agenda at simpsonville.com/meetings. This can help you follow along if you want to do that. We're just a couple of minutes away from our invocation and the call to order at 6:30, so thank you for standing by for our meeting time to arrive. Good to see you, Mr. Hutchings. Okay, we're just a couple of minutes from the call to order. It's a long-standing tradition for City Council to have an invocation before each meeting. As always, we invite any member of the public to deliver an invocation that is consistent with your beliefs and appropriate for the solemn nature of this assembly. Since we are meeting virtually, I invite you to contact me at City Hall if you want to volunteer to do this for a future meeting. I had a volunteer lined up for tonight, and unfortunately she had a conflict come up, so she wasn't able to make it. So we don't have a volunteer to give the invocation tonight. Is there a member of council or staff that will give the invocation? I don't see anybody leaping up to deliver the invocation, so if you would, bow your heads and join me in a moment of prayer. Thank you, God, for bringing us together to do the good work of the city. Please guide us in making just and equitable decisions in our work as members of council. Look out for us as members of council. Look out for our staff. Take care of our first responders and our citizens. In your name we pray. Amen. Okay. Call to order the February 23rd, 21 Committee of the Whole meeting of Simpsonville City Council. City Clerk Long, please call the roll.
Councilmember Gooch,
Here.
Councilmember Kelly,
Here.
Councilmember Houlihan,
Here.
Councilmember Roche, Councilmember Cummings,
Here.
Councilmember Hutchins,
Here.
Mayor Shoemaker,
Here. And
and I think I just saw Miss Roche join. Is that correct?
Here.
We have a quorum.
thank you, Clerk Long. Next on the agenda is approval of the minutes for the Committee of the Whole meeting of January 26, 2021. Are there any corrections to the minutes? Hearing none, the minutes will stand approved as written. All right, next item on the agenda is citizen comments. We didn't have anyone sign up for comments this evening. Please be aware that even though we are currently meeting virtually, getting your comments heard is very easy. You can call my office at City Hall and leave a message on my answering machine. That number is 967-5400, or alternatively, you can record your comments on a smartphone or computer and email them to me at mayorshoemaker@simpsonville.com. My telephone number and my email address can be found on the simpsonville.com website. Please be aware that you need to be a resident or a business owner inside the city limits, and comments must be limited to 3 minutes per person commenting. Next on our agenda is staff reports. For our monthly financial report, Director of Finance Christine Farino. Director Farino.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. A few highlights from the January financial report. General fund revenues were $5.8 million for a total revenues collected year to date at $10.1 million. This brings us to about 50% of the budget. Expenses for January were $1.7 million. Total expenses for the year were $10.6 million, bringing expenses to 53% of the budget. Sewer fund revenues for January were $168,000. Year-to-date revenues are $1.5 million, with 76% of the budget. January expenses for the sewer were $45,000. Year-to-date expenses were $447,000, which is 42% of the budget. Hospitality and accommodation revenues for January were $217,000 for a year-to-date revenue of $1.2 million, which is 52% of the budget. January expenses were $500, with the year-to-date expenses at $1.2 million, which is 57% of the budget. The Public Works Enterprise Fund revenues for January were $971,000, with the revenues year-to-date at $1.1 million, which is 78% of the budget. And there were no expenses for January. Year-to-date expenses in that account were $40,000, which is 16% of the budget. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Councilmember Gooch.
Thank you. One of the things I noticed in the financial report this month, the finances are tracking pretty well, but some of the revenues, it looks like they may be a little lower than last year, obviously because of COVID, we're having some issues there. Some are up, some are down. How are we looking to be on track and keeping in budget for this year?
Overall, I think we're doing pretty well, considering all the circumstances. We still have quite a bit of revenues that will come in, which come in towards the end of the year. So I think overall we're looking pretty good.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions for Director Farino? Okay, thank you, Director Farino. Next is our Community Relations Specialist report, Specialist Campbell.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. You've been provided my report, so I'll just hit the highlights. starting with how well the city continues to strike that balance between providing entertainment for the community while protecting public health. The Valentine's Day event, Daddy-Daughter Date Night, hosted by Parks and Rec earlier this month, is another example of a string of examples of striking that balance by continuing to hold events while implementing guidelines to help prevent the spread of COVID-19, such as social distancing. That event ties into my next topic, which is website content. Recently, I've increased the frequency of our website news releases and posts, an example of which is a post of photos from that Valentine's Day event. Maintaining fresh daily content keeps the public interested and engaged with the city and fosters a direct contact with the public instead of indirect contact via the media. So any department heads, if there's anything, any type of news, anything going on in your department that you think is worth sharing, just let me know. And lastly, the United Way of Greenville County is offering its annual free tax preparation through the Volunteer Income Tax Assistance Program, or VITA. This is available to individuals or families earning a household income less than $60,000 and is provided by trained and certified volunteers, usually college students who are majoring in accounting or a similar field. So I'm promoting that service on our platform so that Simpsonville families can take advantage of free tax preparation assistance. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them or get an answer for them. Thank you.
Are there any questions or comments for Mr. Campbell? Councilmember Houlihan.
Thank you. I just want to say that I think that direct communication from the website to citizens is really fantastic. It's really, I think, improved overall the communication between the city and residents. I personally appreciated getting that information directly from the website and from the website to social media and then directly to me, instead of having to just rely on whether or not the media will choose to report on a press release that you've given. There's lots of things that happen in the city that I and other people are interested in knowing about that maybe the local newspaper, WYFF, doesn't care to report on, but is news to all of us and we'd like to have access to. So I think that's a really great idea, and I love the way that that's working out for us. So thank you for that.
You're very welcome. I agree.
Any other comments or questions for Mr. Campbell? Thank you, Mr. Campbell.
Yes,
Next
sir.
up is Economic Development, our Planning and Economic Development Director, Jason Knudsen. Director Knudsen. Can everybody hear me? There we go. Okay, having some technical issues on the side tonight. The report for this month, our numbers for January with permits going out are in line with what we see from month to month. So we're doing quite well as far as people still building and renovating and pulling the permits within the city. So there's nothing really there that's alarming. For site plan reviews, we've got quite a few projects. They're kind of awaiting revisions from engineers. Some of them have been sitting for a little while. Others are getting traction again, coming back from COVID, if you will. With the boards and commissions, this month, Planning Commission reviewed text amendments to the zoning ordinance, which will be a business item later on the agenda. And then the Board of Zoning Appeals did give a special exception for a multifamily project, which will be located next to Carolina Fine Foods on Southeast Main Street. If anybody has any questions, I'd be more than glad to discuss that. Any questions or comments for Mr. Knudsen? Sorry. All right, thank you, Mr. Knudsen. Yep. Next report is our city administrator report. Administrator Gracely.
Thank you, Mayor, members of council. I don't want to be too redundant based on previous reports, and you have my report in front of you, so I'll just hit a couple of the highlights. A reminder that we will only meet one other time at the business meeting in March before we have our council retreat, our long-awaited retreat that's been rescheduled twice due to COVID. It is definitely a go. We are meeting at Pleasant Ridge County Park, March the 11th and 12th. It'll be the evening of the 11th and then an all-day planning session on the 12th with the Municipal Association's Jeff Shacker facilitating our discussion, but the topics include the downtown master plan, new public facilities for the city, sanitation and the direction we're going to take with that, among other things. So it's very important that everyone be there for that discussion. Of course, no votes are going to be taken at that meeting, but we will be able to have a more detailed discussion than we are normally able to in a business or committee of the whole meeting. Our summer music series and food truck rodeo planning is well underway, as Mr. Campbell mentioned. We have tried to use all of our creativity over the past almost 12 months now to continue to have events that we believe are safe for the public. This is one that we did get creative with last year, and we moved it from City Park to CCNB Amphitheater in order to allow for social distancing. We're doing that again this year to accommodate the concert schedule at CCNB Amphitheater and some hold dates that the promoter had. We've moved the event to Wednesday evenings as opposed to Thursday evenings. So that will be every Wednesday evening beginning in June and running through the end of August. So we hope everyone can join us for that. More details will be forthcoming as far as the bands and food trucks that are going to be scheduled for each week. Just a note and a big hoorah from everybody. We are officially under contract for the Art Center now. The notice to proceed has been acknowledged, and the contractor has put up, if you've been by the site, you'll see the temporary construction fencing that's been erected to secure the site. It's a 240-day contract period. I think it's set to expire on October 13th. We are talking with Milltown Players about a possible Christmas event in that venue that will be the first event to kick that off, and we're all very excited about that. On to some other really good information coming out of Public Works. As you all know, we participate in the Municipal Match Resurfacing Program every year, which allows us to stretch our paving dollars that the city expends. We put in $250,000 per year, which council decided to do. We increased that number to $250,000 when council raised the public works fee 2 years ago. So that money goes into a match program with the county legislative delegation municipal match. And so we had a list of roads that were priorities for us. And in addition to the 5 that are scheduled for resurfacing, once they took bids, King Asphalt's unit pricing came in a little lower than expected. And the good news is that we have about $40,000 additionally to spend on resurfacing. About the time that that information was being provided, we were looking at parking options for downtown, which you all know is getting more and more crowded. South Maple Street is a very wide street, and there's ample room if we resurface and restripe South Maple to allow for parallel parking on both sides of the street. And we feel like we can net about an additional 40 spaces. That has to be completely laid out by the engineer before we'll know the exact number, but certainly 40 additional spaces to service that block of South Main, and also the warehouse at Vaughn's will be very advantageous. So the plan is to have Co-Transco, who is doing the engineering for all of our resurfacing work, to lay that out and price it with King Asphalt, since they are the low bidder for the municipal match program. I'll provide you more information on that as we get information in on the exact pricing. We may have to find some additional dollars within our budget to accommodate that, but I think it's very important on 2 fronts. One, we did make a sewer cut to do the sewer rehabilitation work on South Maple, and that cut extends the length of the street. So it's a good time to resurface, because we would be making a complete repair on that sewer cut. And it would also allow us to restripe to net additional parking. The last thing I'll mention on my report is the first concert has been announced by our promoter, TRZ. That's scheduled for May the 7th. They've submitted their reopening plan and an application to the Department of Commerce for permission to hold that event. They've been granted that permission. I have a copy of that reopening plan. I'll be happy to email to any of you who are interested. and the precautions that are going to be put into place to accommodate for social distancing and sanitation for what will be the largest event we've seen in quite some time. And I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have in addition to those.
Any questions or comment for Administrator Gracely? Councilmember Roche?
You hear me, Diana?
Yeah, just now.
Okay. I never have technical difficulties, and so I have to say something. Are you allowed to tell us what the concert will be?
I can. That one's been announced. It's actually called the WESC Family Reunion. That's not a Live Nation event. That's a TRZ event that they are doing with iHeartRadio. The headliner for that is Travis Tritt, and there'll be other country entertainers as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilmember Hutchings?
Mr. President, regarding the Art Center and Milltown Players, how close are we to reaching a contractual agreement with that theater group for use of the facility?
Well, we already reached an agreement in principle with them months and months ago, probably more than a year ago, before the city even decided to accept the grant award and put the additional funding in for renovation. So all of the terms have been agreed to. We haven't signed an official agreement. The main reason for that is not knowing when we can turn the facility over to them, because it will be a lease agreement. And obviously we need to know the dates for the lease. We can't turn the facility over to them until the contract is completely finished and has vacated the site. So the terms have all been agreed to. That was part of the proposal that they submitted to council. But really about the time I came to work in Simpsonville, and then we just worked from that point forward to finalize all of the terms. It's a good agreement for both parties, keep the center in use year round. Their plan is to do 5 productions per year. They'll pay us a monthly fee to help defray the cost of utilities and, of course, maintenance on the site. The bigger picture is that we're going to have a center that feeds commerce to downtown from folks attending events there, and that should have a very big economic impact for the city.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other comments or questions for Administrator Gracely? Okay, I have one. On the repaving of Maple Street, I know it's early, we're not even to the stage of drawings yet, but right now, where the street abuts the property that belongs to Temple Baptist, people are parking, they're driving across the verge and into that property. There's no bump or anything there at all. It's just smooth from pavement right into the dirt lot. Is there any plan to put in curbing or anything to prevent people from jumping into their private property?
The corner at Trade and Maple, I think they're accessing from Trade Street. We're not doing any work on Trade Street. In fact, the work, in addition to the resurfacing, we're looking at doing some grading work. As you come to the end of South Maple toward Trade, you'll notice there's that wall there. And if a car parks parallel, the passenger in that car can't really get out because the wall's so close you can't open the car door. So that's part of the reason why I don't have a firm number for you on the cost, because the contractor's having to price out the grading work to actually grade down that wall and redo the sidewalk so that we can take advantage of the parallel parking near where that wall currently exists. We had to have some survey work done first to make sure that that was public right-of-way and not property that belonged to the church. It is, in fact, public right-of-way. Speaking of the church, there is I think they've had some change in leadership, and there's now maybe a different climate when it comes to the potential for leasing some property to the city. Ideally, I prefer that the city purchase it, because if we're going to do any kind of improvements, it's better to do that on property that we own and not property that we have a short-term lease agreement with. So I'm waiting for Pastor Aiken to call and discuss details with me. He's acknowledged our interest, and he's going to be getting in touch with me very soon to talk about details, which of course I'll bring to council, because that would involve, the commitment of city funds, particularly if it ends up being a purchase. It would involve the commitment of city funds that would probably be a capital item, either funded through our downtown master plan and a project associated with that, or a new fiscal budget, which, I forgot to mention in my report, we are well underway working on FY22 budget numbers too.
All right, thank you. Any other comments or questions? We are joined tonight by our department heads. Are there any comments or questions for them? Okay, thank you. So number 6 on the agenda are the business items. For those of you who are following the live stream, passage of an item by council during a committee of the whole, approval to move that item to the agenda of the next business meeting of council. Start with item 6A, TX-2021-01, the miscellaneous refinements to the city's zoning ordinance. Director Knudsen, please summarize.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. So about every year, we have a number of items that we've found either need to be tweaked a little bit, added to, or removed from our zoning ordinance. And so that's what's before you tonight. Just to briefly go through them, kind of being proactive with master planning and what we'd like to see in our downtown. We've gone ahead and done some ordinance work to be able to ensure that a brewery or a brew pub would be able to locate inappropriate areas, as that's a big draw and something that we'd like to be able to bring to our city. As well, we're having, as townhomes are being developed, we're finding that parking is becoming an issue in some of these developments. As you know, a townhome's lot is typically narrow, and families are growing larger and larger. And so currently most of the townhomes have a single width drive that goes into the garage, and it kind of leads to people parking on streets and causing issues within the neighborhoods. And so as an alternative for some of these townhome developments at the early stages of permitting, we will allow them to go a little bit more than that 50% restriction we have right now for driveway widths on a property. But in order to get that, the Planning Commission would need to review their proposal to do above and beyond streetscaping, so that we have a beautification somewhere else within the development. And there's still some things, like it can't just be a solid piece of asphalt or concrete. There has to be some division there. So aesthetically, we're kind of giving an alternative and to get people to walk those streets. We've also found that the Board of Zoning Appeals met quite a bit last year, and probably 9 out of 10 things they met about all had to do with administrative offices for a construction service. And so looking at that, discussion-wise with staff, if they're just doing administrative work, they're no different than an administrative office. And so we're adding in that if it's truly an administrative office, so they're not storing materials, vehicles, those type of things on site, and they're just doing administrative, that they can be permitted by right in the business general district. Also the business urban, residential office institution business limited. And that would reduce these meetings. We haven't had a single one denied by the Board of Zoning Appeals at this time. And so this would kind of undo a burden, if you will, for that board. We're also clarifying some things with outdoor music. If there's going to be outdoor music at an establishment, we're just citing that any regulations to deal with volume and sound will be taken care of by basically our noise ordinance. And so, let's see, we're also finding that more projects, as things are going on, as technology is always improving and building materials are improving in efficiencies. that metal exterior finishes are not only kind of trendy, but they serve quite a function, especially with making a building more energy efficient and weatherproof. And so we're looking to alter the exterior building materials to allow for high quality architectural metal, not to exceed 50% of the facade. So it still can't be an all metal building, and the ordinance still does not permit aluminum siding and corrugated metal and those things that would kind of be associated with a cheaper look. To be consistent with our planning commission, we found that our Board of Zoning Appeals does not have currently a membership requirement of living in the city or owning and operating a business in the city. And so we want to clarify that to be consistent with our planning commission, that you do have to be a resident or own and operate a business within the city. That also helps ensure that those people who are applying and serving on that do have a vested interest in our city. Another thing, kind of going back to the brewery, we have a very vague measurement standard in place for how to measure distances between certain uses. And to make the process a little easier on applicants when dealing with alcohol-related businesses, we are mirroring what the state requirement is. And that makes it a lot easier during the permitting process to be able to tell somebody that if you're able to obtain your state license, then you'll be meeting our requirements here. And those requirements have to do with how you measure from the entry point of one of these establishments to things like playgrounds, churches, and so it'll make things a lot easier on development as it goes forward and be a lot more clear on how to perform those measurements. And the last item here is to clarify language that shipping containers, whether modified or not, are not permitted within the city as an accessory structure or an accessory storage container. That also does include temporary pod type storage devices as well. This did go before the Planning Commission on the 2nd of this month, and they unanimously did pass it on or recommend approval, and there was no public comment during that meeting. So if anybody has any comments or questions, we're more than glad to field those.
Thank you, Mr. Director. Motion is in order. Councilmember Gooch?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I move we accept TX-2021-01 miscellaneous refinements to the city's ordinance as described.
I didn't catch who the second was from. That's Stephanie.
Second.
Thank you. So on the motion to approve TX 2021-01 miscellaneous refinements to the city zoning ordinance, we have a motion from Councilmember Gooch with a second from Councilmember Kelly. Discussion, questions? Councilmember Gooch.
Thank you. One question, Mr. Knudsen. At the end of your delivery, you said something about accessory pods, for example, modified pods. Did you say they would not be allowed? If that's the case, how does that affect the latest ones that have been put in down there at Vaughn's that have been put in on the outskirts of that building? Or maybe I misunderstood you. Could you clarify for me, please?
Sure. So by regulation, without being in a planned development or a innovative development, Vaughn's is in that special innovative development, which does allow them to change some of the regulations, and usually that's to allow for something innovative, something that's a little different. So they fall in that category. So does Burdette. They have still been kind of kicking around the idea of using one of the containers, and those have to go through approval from council and planning commission. And there's where we have a lot more control on how they're used, where they're placed, what they're going to look like, how they're going to be maintained, as opposed to something that could be permitted by right, and we have a lot less ability to regulate. The zoning ordinance, as it is now, we feel very strongly already does not allow these. But we've been challenged as an administrative appeal, and we've also had other businesses and things that just don't feel that our ordinance is very clear And so this is really more of a clarification point, but it's something we feel is already in place.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
I saw Councilmember Hutchings. Councilmember Hutchings.
Yes, Mr. Knudsen, under 3.3.9, this clarification, this lead to a more objective measurement of the sound, outdoor music sound as related to decibel level rather than subjective measurement.
So it'll be whatever's in the noise ordinance, which does have to do with decibel levels. What this is really doing is just putting a statement in our zoning ordinance so that when somebody's looking up standards for outdoor dining or those kind of things, this will give them an idea where they need to go for their standards and regulations.
Thank you.
Councilmember Roche.
Thank you. Let me find where I was here. I'm sorry. The breweries, as far as aligning with the state requirements as far as placements, are you talking, is that talking about how close they can be to a school or a church, or is that what that means?
Yeah, so the state does require, and we feel we're in agreement that establishments can't be within certain feet of playgrounds, churches, schools, kind of those more sensitive areas. And so we're kind of using what's already in the state law to kind of help with what those measurements should be. So we're not being more stringent than what's required for their permits through the state.
Okay. And then the driveways, expanding those, that was for, is that just for townhomes? That wouldn't apply to, so like single family homes right now, they can have a wider driveway as it is, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. This is just a regulation for attached single family, which would be your typical townhome.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councilmember Houlihan.
Thank you. At the end of your report, when you talk about the Planning Commission review, you note that there was some discussion regarding the change to the exterior finish material. The commission vague as to what type of material could be used. Could you elaborate on that discussion and what resolution, if any, there was?
Sure. I was unable to attend that meeting, but speaking with John Derby, there's just a little bit of worry that it might be a little too vague and allow something that we wouldn't necessarily want. But kind of the counter to that is we've already specifically listed the type of metals we don't want, that aluminum siding or the corrugated metal. And I found that trying to be more specific, it's a very difficult thing to do because I was going to be listing some different metal systems that are popular right now as kind of examples and guidelines. But when you look into some of those systems, it does lead you to lower quality materials that could potentially be a negative or be something that we don't allow for our zoning ordinance. And so they kind of went back and forth on whether or not it was too vague or not. But in the end, they did recommend approval unanimously without any changes.
Okay, and I sort of shared that concern when I looked at this as well, so that's why I was asking about it. And I know that we've talked about this before in looking at some of the ordinances and some of the proposed developments about this metal finish, but before we get to the business meeting, could you provide us with some of those examples for our own educational purposes, even if they're not in the ordinance itself? You're not listing them out, but provide them to us and maybe some pictures and that sort of thing so that we all understand what it is and what it is not.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions for Mr. Knudsen? Okay. So we're ready to go to the vote. So on the motion, TX2021-01, miscellaneous refinements to the city zoning ordinance. City Clerk Long, would you conduct a roll call vote for me, please?
Councilmember Gooch,
Yes.
Councilmember Kelly,
Yes.
Councilmember Houlihan,
Yes.
Councilmember Roche,
Yes.
Councilmember Cummings,
Yes.
Councilmember Hutchings,
Yes.
Mayor Shoemaker.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Thank you, Clerk Long.
Thank you.
Next item on our agenda is 6B, ordinance number 2021-01, Animal Control Amendment. Councilmember Gooch, please summarize.
Thank you. And Mr. Mayor, you're one of the few people I can see. If I'm not coming through, please just wave at me. Thank you, Mayor and Council, for considering this. Considering what Mr. Boozy just said about cleaning up a few things, I found this the other day, and what I'm proposing is change the animal ordinance for section 6-84 for nuisance animals. Proposed change would strike the language in the existing ordinance regarding the number of animals allowed. The current language allows the limit at 4. There are several issues with this language as it exists. First, the ordinance makes no distinction between types of animals. For example, a household with any combination of animals is in violation of the ordinance, even if they have 5 fish or an ant farm. Striking the existing language eliminates that issue. Second, there is a redundancy in the existing ordinance. Section 6-84, section C3 already makes it a nuisance to maintain property in a manner that is offensive, et cetera, et cetera. There is an effective limit on the number of animals one can have, and it gives the animal control officer discretion in the section of the ordinance. Striking the language as proposed does in no way change this section. Third, another example would be if somebody has a litter of animals they intend to sell or rescue or otherwise give away, they would be considered in violation of their in this situation, even though it is temporary. As an example, the city of Greenville has no such limitations on their ordinances. They do have language specifically regarding keeping of fowl. That is a separate issue that can and should be addressed. I would ask that we discuss that topic at the upcoming retreat to get a good idea as to how to implement ordinances for that specific issue, as well as some other issues that exist in our current ordinance. For now, I ask that you consider this single proposed change as a small first step in the direction of making other needed changes, and therefore I move we accept the proposed change for section 6-84 as proposed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Gooch. Motion is in order, unless we're considering that a motion.
I did make a motion at the end of that statement.
Okay, second.
So I have a motion from Councilmember Gooch with a second from Councilmember Kelly to approve ordinance number 2021-01, Animal Control Amendment. Discussion? Councilmember Houlihan.
Thank you. In 2017, and actually I was looking for my notes, and I think we started this in 2016. It carried over on into 2017 for months. We went through the entire animal ordinance with a fine-tooth comb. For the better part of a year, we, the council and the city staff, conducted research, we solicited feedback and legal advice, we reviewed neighboring ordinances and national information as well. We received public comment from citizens, as well as expert testimony from people from animal advocacy groups and animal advocacy leaders. We went section by section and debated that ordinance publicly over and over until we arrived at a, what was very rare at the time, compromise. And that's the current ordinance. In general, I am opposed to changing an ordinance that has so recently and thoroughly been reviewed and revised without some significant evidence of need that impacts the majority, not just a few of the city's residents. In this case, I have to ask what has substantially changed since 2017, and I can't really find an answer that would necessitate a change to the ordinance. I checked in with Ms. Gracely to see if there had been complaints or concerns lodged with the city, and she indicated that they had not received those at City Hall or with the police department. I asked if the animal control officer had recommendations regarding the ordinance. Was he having problems with enforcement? Was there something he saw that needed to be changed? Officer Hightower, who was the animal control officer at the time, indicated he did not support any changes to the animal ordinance. I've reviewed the information that's been provided to council now, and I'm really not seeing the need to change the ordinance. The points that were made in the memo to council are points that were brought up in 2016 and 2017 and were addressed, and we discussed them at the time, debated them at the time, and again, the ordinance as written is what we came up with. I think that the ordinance serves its purpose. It serves the majority of citizens fairly. It does what it's supposed to do, and I'm not in favor of making changes to the ordinance at this time.
Thank you, Councilmember Houlihan. Is there any other comments, discussion? Councilmember Roche?
Councilwoman Houlihan was so thorough. I will just say that I agree with everything that she just said. Having considered a change in the ordinance as far as banning roosters and allowing for backyard chickens in recent months, I was not able to get the support of council for that small change. I pulled my memo back, decided not to put it, to bring it to the table for discussion. I'm kind of shocked by this because it's removing any number at all. And the cases of animal hoarding that we're seeing, I love animals. I have a beautiful little dog that I adore. Our family wouldn't be complete without him, but I have one dog because that's what I can manage. Animal hoarding is a real problem these days. People do find I'm thrilled that they have a heart to rescue animals, but sometimes that gets out of hand. I understand Greenville County has different ordinances, but Greenville County is Greenville County. There's a lot more property to cover. The houses can be, spaced further apart. Here in our tiny city, I think it's dangerous not to have a number. I don't know that the number should necessarily be 4. I might be in favor of increasing the number, but I do think there should be a number, and I'm willing to discuss this more in detail, but I would not be in favor of approving this evening.
Thank you, Councilmember Roche. Councilmember Kelly?
I do think that there could be some revisions to this, and while I realize that this was reviewed a while back, by not designating or identifying the animals, I see the point. And we had issues about bees, chickens, all kinds. And so I think it would be worth reviewing and getting some input on possibly at least identifying the different pets that are allowed. Nuisance can be very broad to some people. Some people may hate dogs, for goodness sakes, and they think that's a nuisance. So I realize that it has a sort of a legal meaning, but I do think this is open to being, an arguable point if we don't get it a little bit tighter. I don't know that I feel like there should be no limit, but I do think we should identify the animals and possibly raise the limit, Sherry. So that's it.
Thank you, Councilmember Kelly. Is there further discussion? Councilmember Hutchings?
I have a question. I'm not sure who direct this to, but is there, under the current ordinance, is there a latitude in determining enforcement of the code as to what type of animals we're addressing with the number, or is this strictly a general ordinance requirement of numbers regardless of the type of animal?
Administrator Gracely, can you answer that question?
I believe it's just the number 4, and that encompasses what would be considered domestic animals. Right now, Officer Hightower has moved into another role in the police department, and so we have a vacancy in animal control. Everyone's pitching in to take care of any nuisance complaints that we get. Chief Hanshaw might want to weigh in on whether or not. I don't believe we've had any increase in those complaints. I've not had anything come across my desk that was a legitimate complaint. Of course, you read comments on social media, but unless someone calls City Hall or calls the police department or writes an email and wants to lodge an official complaint, and we could send an officer out there to investigate, it's hard to put too much stock in those. Chief Hanshaw, do you have anything that you might want to add?
No, I think you've covered it. I'm not aware of any increase in any complaints in that area. I know we're transitioning officers. We do have another officer to fill the slot. He's out on some maternity leave right now, but so I'm not aware that we've had any increase in problems currently.
So, Mr. Hutchings, to answer your question, I believe it's just a total number of 4. And to Mr. Gooch's point, I understand the concern if you're fostering pets or if you have an animal that's had a litter. Obviously, you're going to exceed that number. I don't know that there's a section in the ordinance that deals with that directly, but of course, the animal control officer would use their discretion to say, newborn puppies who have to feed with their mother in order to survive would not be considered part of the restricted number. I think we're talking about adult, dogs that would be, out around the household, barking and causing a nuisance. They would be considered part of that number.
Councilmember Hutchings, you still have the floor.
Yes, that was the reason for my questions. So there is some discretion used depending on the situation under the current ordinance. Thank you.
I believe Councilmember Kelly raised her hand. Councilmember Kelly?
I think that was my point. What she just said is if it's up to discretion of the officer, that's one thing. But if the officer changes, how do they know? This is a way for them to know how to enforce, a way for them to kind of as a guide to how to enforce this. So maybe if you do have 4 or 5 newborn puppies and a mom and dad, who's to say that officer may not say, I'm sorry, you have more than 4. And it's just period. So I don't think it would hurt to get, again, to add a little bit of clear language to this on the types of animals and, say indoor pets other than cats and dogs. Your fish, I have a lizard that I would like to go outside with the dogs, but things like that, kind of need a little bit more clarity here. Just, honestly, I would not be opposed to us, I don't know if we should table this to the next workshop and everybody give their input, or to vote, go ahead and vote. I don't particularly like the idea of being just as many animals as you want, but again, clarity.
Councilmember Gooch?
Thank you. Just a couple of points. Ms. Kelly did bring up a good point. It is an officer discretion, and that language is clearly spelled out in the section that will not be changed by this. As to number of animals, City of Greenville doesn't have that problem. We've not had hoarding complaints that I'm aware of. The biggest change that has happened in the last year has been COVID. More people are home, more people are fostering animals. adoptions have increased significantly. And right now, the officer has no discretion. If there are 5 animals in a house, that person is in violation, regardless of the type of animal. The rule, despite it having been reviewed several years ago when I was part of that, clearly we missed some things. One thing was we made no designation or distinction as to type of animal. The city ordinance has nothing that says somebody couldn't keep sheep if they want to. I personally don't want my neighbor keeping sheep next to me. This is something that we need to address, and this is one way to do it. The officer would have discretion. That's not going to go away. And if we need to review it further, the one problem I have found, if we get into the weeds with this and start making more and more detailed ordinances, the more complicated the ordinance gets, honestly, the harder it can be to enforce. This actually simplifies what we have and makes it more like what other municipalities have. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Gooch. Councilmember Cummings?
Yes, I'm hearing the information here, and in my opinion, based on the fact that we are without the animal control officer, it almost makes sense, in my opinion, that we can wait until we review this information with an expert in the field, so that we can make probably the most informed decision for not just today and the future. I know we addressed this a few years ago and covered a lot of things, and there may be some opportunities to make some corrections, but I don't think it would be in the best interest to make those changes now in advance of the hiring of that position. That would be, the person would be considered to control that moving forward. Thank you.
Councilmember Cummings? Any other discussion from council members? Okay, I will just add my comment, and it's just kind of echo of what Councilmember Cummings just said, that my concern is right now we don't have an animal control officer, so it's falling to the discretion of the police officers who are being asked to enforce our ordinances if it comes up. So when you throw it open to more discretion among more people, I think that's a little problematic. Now, it's a temporary situation, but I think I echo exactly what Councilmember Cummings was saying, is that maybe we need to wait until we have an animal control officer in place and we can get some discussion with them about what makes sense. Councilmember Gooch?
I move to table.
Second.
Councilmember Gooch with a second from Councilmember Kelly. Discussion? Hearing none, we have a motion to table. The motion for ordinance 2021-01 animal control amendment. City Clerk Long, would you conduct a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Gooch?
Yes.
Councilmember Kelly?
Yes.
Councilmember Houlihan?
Yes.
Councilmember Roche?
Yes.
Councilmember Cummings?
Yes.
Councilmember Hutchins?
Yes.
Mayor Shoemaker?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Thank you, Clerk Long. Okay, that concludes our business items. Next up on the agenda is a need to go into executive session. A motion is in order. Councilmember Houlihan?
Mr. Mayor, I move that council go into executive session for the discussion of the performance of an employee in the administration department.
Councilmember Gooch?
Second.
Okay, I have a motion from Councilmember Houlihan with a second from Councilmember Gooch to go into executive session for the discussion of the performance of an employee in the administration department. Discussion? Hearing no discussion, City Clerk Long, would you conduct the roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Gooch?
Yes.
Councilmember Kelly?
Yes.
Councilmember Houlihan?
Yes.
Councilmember Roche?
Yes.
Councilmember Cummings?
Yes.
Councilmember Hutchins?
Yes.
Mayor Shoemaker?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Thank you, Clerk Long. So this is my announcement that council will now go into executive session for the purpose of discussion of the performance of an employee in the administration department. When we come out of executive session, council may vote on items discussed. In the event that there are no items requiring a vote, council may adjourn in executive session without returning to the public session. Mr. Campbell, please end the live stream.